Alon Ferency. What a great conversation. What a fascinating man. Such insight and curiosity and light. He grew up in Rochester. No, he was born in Rochester, grew up in Boston area, but he went out to the West Coast to explore music, to explore being part of that scene. Always as a child had a calling to be a rabbi. Came back to the East Coast, became a rabbi, and now he's no longer there, but just has such a unique perspective on art, on music itself, and what it means to have that kind of life, to make that switch, to answer that calling. He says at one point that it was easier not to be a rabbi it was harder not to be a rabbi than it was to become one. But just the role, how he went up for certain acting parts and didn't get them, and how Dungeons and Dragons played a role in his life. And it's just fascinating perspective from Alon Ferency. Really enjoyed talking to him. And I look forward to see what comes next with him. Thanks for watching and listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How did I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Really, really excited to talk to you, Alon Ferency. Thank you for your time. Is every artist a thief?
There's a lot of them. I didn't know you would start with the hard questions. There's Lionel Trilling said that immature artists imitate and mature artists steal. And I think he may not have been the originator of the quotation. He's a critic from the 50s into recent times. That is a great question. Is every artist a thief? I mean, I think I read recently listened to the biography of Geddy Lee of the band Rush, and he said that there is a process of accumulating thieved material to find your voice, so you become sort of a mosaic of the things that influenced you. I mean, I don't think, and there is another saying by Francis Bacon that if you are the first person to say something, you will also be the last, which I think implies that if you're not part of a chain of tradition, your words carry less weight. Certainly the Jewish tradition values things that preceded us. And then innovation, I think from my own personal experience, innovation much more often comes from synthesis than originality as we would think of it. I guess God is original and the rest of us are just copying. Is thief right for that? It feels cruel, but maybe true. Borrower, quoter, someone who quotes things, I guess.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza Dash MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza Dash platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. So there's no new ideas.
Ecclesiastes would say that. No, that's where I would part ways. I think there are new ideas, but those new ideas come from syntheses of existing possibilities. And I find when I'm at my most creative, what I'm doing is taking two extremely distant ideas and bringing them together. Like I taught Bible through using role-playing games, through Dungeons and Dragons. So I was very proud of that. And it turns out someone had done it before also. So I suppose.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a famous quote. I don't know who knows if it's true, but I think it was in 1899. The United States, the person in charge of the patent office wanted to close the office, so there's nothing new that possibly could be invented. And this was in 1899.
My father-in-law has like 8 patents to his name. So yeah, it's fascinating. That is a great story. Yeah. I mean, I think the idea that there is an apex of civilization and we'll never create anything new is tricky.
Mm.
We might destroy ourselves, I guess.
Do you believe in the Muse, Elon?
Wow, you came prepared. Do I believe in the Muse? I would call that God.
Mm.
I mean, I think God is,
Mm.
we experience God. God is not a thing or a person, but it is an experience. And what we call God is the experience of what artists call flow.
Mm.
And I think that is also what the Greeks called the Muse. Sure. I believe in the Muse by different names. Rick Rubin calls it the source. Yeah, I do. I think it's an attunement. I don't think the human is not part of that experience and you have to listen for it. But I think if you can attune yourself through various practices, yeah, I think you can hear the Muse. Yeah.
I always go back to the story of Bob Dylan making Along the Watchtower. So he makes this and releases it, and within 2 weeks, Jimi Hendrix is performing it live, and Bob Dylan happens to see it. And when he sees it, he says, "That song was never mine. That is his song. The way he played right now is the way it should be done.
Yeah.
It was mine temporarily, and he never performed it again." So is that the Muse in action?
What is that? Because I knew that story, but I did not know it was 2 weeks.
It may be less or more, but I knew it was soon.
I did not know it was soon. I did not know how quick. I mean, I always assumed it was years. Is that the Muse, or is that
So the
there's
Muse
something?
decide where it
There's
wants to
something
go.
collaborating. You know,
Mm,
we are always part of a community of the people who preceded us and the people around us. There's a lot of evidence, even in terms of history and science, of that there are scenes, there are creative scenes, whether it's Lower East Side in the 60s, whether it's Odessa in the 1900s, whether it's Paris also in the 1900s, by the 1800s. There are scenes and we experience each other. And I think that is a synchronicity and a collaboration.
hmm.
And the Muse must exist between people because you have so many art forms that are collaborative, right? Poetry might be the most extreme of non-collaborative art, and filmmaking may involve the most people. So the Muse
Mm,
has to exist between people. And then there is the idea Jewishly that wherever two people engage in study of sacred text, God rests God's presence above and between them,
hmm.
which would be, one could certainly say, is another word for the Muse. Yeah. Exists within, between, and beyond. Yeah. That's going to affect my theology. I'm going to have to do new writing.
It always fascinates me when I speak to artists and especially fiction authors, how they just claim that they had a particular direction a character is going to go, and then the pen or the keyboard just took over, and it goes in a direction that they had no plan for. And I just it's wonderment to me. I can't. It's amazing to me. I just need to understand how that. I guess I don't need to understand. I would like to understand how that happens.
Yeah, the idea of, I have heard that. Most recently, I started reading the Gunslinger, Stephen King series,
Yeah.
and the idea of characters taking on their life. I only know that from tabletop role play, where you create characters and they do start to take on their
Mm,
life. So it must
mm,
happen if you have narrative capacity. With fiction authors, and I've just scratched the surface of writing fiction recently, I imagine the characters start to live. And I create very small stories because I can't understand how people write stories with hundreds of characters and keep all the voices and ideas in their heads, but they must develop their identity. And then to take that further, when those books or any sort of literature, even Breaking Bad, is brought to screen, the characters start to develop with the actor.
mm.
Right? As an actor, I've definitely seen you have a sense of what the character is. And the more you play the character and engage with the other actors, you start to understand the character differently. Like the last play I was in was Taming of the Shrew. I played sort of the young friend Hortensio. And in engaging with the script, we sort of formulated that Hortensio had a crush on Petruchio,
Hmm.
that his real desire was for Petruchio and not for Bianca. So, yeah, I think these things do evolve, but in such strange ways.
It does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's the beauty. That's really the beauty of art, isn't it, alone? Because when I go to a museum, I'm always kind of entertained as if somebody giving a tour and this artist meant this and meant that and this symbolizes that. I kind of like that, but I really don't care because it's really up to me what I want to take from this. And my other issue with that is I always feel it's like 200 concerts going on at the same time, right? Because it's just so many different paintings. I kind of want to kind of cleanse myself and then go to the next. It's amazing to me how art is such an integral part of just joy and us being human beings.
Oh, yeah. Especially in destructive and difficult times. Yes,
Mm.
for sure. Two things that your story made me think of that I want to share with you. There's a group called The Third Bird. They're very hard to isolate and connect with, but they do these kind of extended meditations around a single painting.
Hmm.
And then when I work with artists, visual artists especially, the idea that they should write their artist statement and describe to people why they wrote this painting or why they did this
Mm.
gallery show, I don't like
Yeah.
either, for some of the same reasons, because it's about the viewer too and her or his experience of it. I think the artist needs to have an artist statement for herself or himself or their selves, but the viewer doesn't need to know.
Mm.
And it should be about, yes, I think 100% agree. It should be your experience of Picasso. Whatever Picasso meant or whatever William Carlos Williams meant in a poem is no longer relevant in some ways.
It isn't. And when I hear to this, what did the artist have in mind? We have the great Dali Museum here. I'm in Tampa Bay area, and you could spend years in there. And what he intended really doesn't. It really doesn't matter. So fascinating. You grew up in upstate New York.
No, I
You
was
were
born in upstate New York. I grew up in Boston.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. You were
yeah.
born upstate New York, then
I
went
have
over to
no memory
Boston.
of Rochester, New
Of
York.
Rochester at all,
Yeah.
yeah. But you were in the Peace Corps in Cameroon. You
Yes.
you biked across the country. You decided to go out west, and tell me how, Rashida Jones sent you on a different path.
That's some inside baseball. this is mythical. I don't know if it's true and historical, but myths are sometimes more important than history. So I was a hotshot actor in high school. Oh my God, I forgot I told you that. Or you found that out somewhere. I was a hotshot actor in high school. I thought very highly of myself. And I get to college. Rashida is in my graduating class in college. Was. I get to college and I auditioned for a play. I believe it was Death Trap because I'd always been curious about that play. I'd seen scenes from a movie of it, I believe. And I'm in this audition, and the person I'm auditioning opposite is so much better than me. And for the first time, I feel like they're teaching me something and bringing me up. And I, of course, didn't get the part. So I just started to assume, well, I think everyone in college is probably much better than me. I probably should just stop.
Hmm.
And I gave up acting for years until I did Taming of the Shrew, really, which would have been over 10 years later, about 10
Wow.
years later. And in retrospect, I'd like to believe, and I think that's likely true, but of course, 30 years later, I don't know that it was Rashida Jones.
Ah.
So, and she had been trained as an actor from a very young age in a family of performers.
Yes,
So,
yes, brilliant. Yeah, brilliant artists, her father and others. Yeah, and you talk about the whole. You managed the band in the West, and you mentioned Rick Rubin. You went to his house, which I do believe now is burned down. What was the party like in his place?
oh, well, to say I went to his house implies he knows who I
Right,
was.
you were
There
at a
was
party at his
definitely a
house.
fourth party who knew someone and said, there's going to be a great party. You should go to this party. I don't know how I got invited. It was the best party I've ever been to.
Wow.
I don't even know that it was his house. I know he was there and I was told it was his house, but that could have been a myth too. Or multiple bars. I was young. I made out with many people that night.
Nice.
I had a gorgeous pictures of me from that night. It was the first time I ever wore eyeliner, and I had this classic Pink Floyd ratty t-shirt on and really cool jeans. It was the coolest I've ever been,
Mm.
and very briefly lived. But he was in the distance talking to a cluster of people, and I really regret not. I didn't know
Mm.
who he was in the same way that I do now, and he,
Ah.
to be fair, he does look vaguely like a homeless person from a distance. It's like, who is this person? I assumed he was on drugs, which I think he's a teetotaler.
No,
So
yeah. Yeah, probably wasn't wearing shoes,
he
right?
may not have been. Yes,
Yeah.
that's likely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated, with Def Jam and, the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J all the way through the Red Hot Chili Peppers
Yeah.
and on and on and on, and, I believe Shangri-La was the name of his house, I
No,
think.
Shangri-La is the place in Malibu. This was a place in the Hollywood Canyons, which
Ah,
makes me think maybe it wasn't his house and
I
he was
see,
just hosting a party there,
I see.
or it was a party at someone's house that people knew he would be at. The full story is lost to me. I was just invited third hand. I really shouldn't have been there. There's no reason for me to have been at that party. No one cared.
But you were, and it's a
I
great
was.
piece. Yes,
I
a great piece
was.
of your memory. So is the music industry fair to musicians?
So there's two ways of thinking about this. There's a guy, William Dershowitz, who wrote a book, The Death of the Artist. I believe that's the name of it. And he says that this is the worst it's ever been. And I actually kind of think it might be the best it's ever been.
Mm.
I mean, the ability for musicians to reach not just fans, but communities, to create art free of constraint, to do it with and without a label. The labels having a different balance of power, so that when an artist comes to sign with a label and they already have 100,000 or a million TikTok followers, they have a lot more leverage in the agreement.
Mm.
They're much more likely to keep their masters.
Hmm.
But I also think, working with independent artists need publicists and art designers and producers and engineers. And we kind of misunderstand what a label is. A label is just really a place to put all that in one building. And you sign a contract where you get a full suite of services. You could be an indie artist, but then you have to draw the album cover yourself and
Mm.
press the albums yourself. It's not, and those have costs as well. You just have a little more control, maybe, but you're also subject to a lot of compromise in that situation as well. I think there are genuinely people in the music business who care about music, and there are people who are in it for money, and people who have a balance, and people who have lost sight of what really matters, maybe. But I also don't want artists to starve, right? I'm happy when record labels make money for the artists,
Mm.
and when big artists like Taylor Swift allow record labels to take chances on smaller artists. So I'm not opposed to commerce.
I remember when Apple had some deal where for some clause where the first 60 days or something while they're under trial that the artist doesn't get paid, something like that. And Taylor Swift wrote, I think it was one tweet, said this is unfair, and then Apple just changed everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Jay-Z started Tidal for some of those, so he wanted to have his own streaming service, right?
Mm.
I think it's an odd situation more so now that artists are becoming business people and they have restaurants and cologne lines and
Mm.
tequila. Those are odd to me, ancillaries, but go for it.
Mm.
I don't have a problem. I just think it can cause the art to get warped a little when your incentives are different. Right? And you see that even with photographers and Instagram. Well, they'll tell me, am I taking this picture because I love it, or I just know it will get a lot of likes on Instagram?
Hmm. I know you're a fan of streaming as well. I remember Rick Rubin actually talking about when streaming first came out, how excited he was, and he had this catalog of music that he can reach at any point. But he got to a certain point where he said, I realized that I wanted to be programmed to. There was just too much, and the idea of having a music station and them sending me stuff and sending me new stuff that I didn't want before. So he does that as well as the other, but he never realized the true importance of it and how valuable it was to him until streaming came.
What's the part that he valued? I'm
He v
confused by.
he valued a radio station would play songs that he never heard of before, that he
Right.
never heard, and so they would introduce that along with whatever the genre of the station was, and when you had streaming, you generally made a list and just listened to everything you're familiar with, or kind of branch out into other artists that you were told of, but when you're programmed to, you're kind of forced to listen to, and he said there's great benefit to that. This
I'm
I
not sure I
believe.
agree. I cannot listen to radio anymore.
Yeah, I
I
can't
find
either.
it like I'm being tied down by a single person. And I get the problem with the algorithm where it's like an invisible hand and
Mm,
there is an AI, so to speak, to it. But I've discovered more music since the advent of Spotify than I have since I was in college.
interesting.
I'm constantly discovering new music. I think you get the other situation, which is the overwhelm of choice, too much choice. You know,
Right.
the classic study, if you have 24 kinds of jam, you're less likely to pick one than if you only have six choices.
Mm,
And I do sometimes default to listening to music that I've always loved rather than exploring new music because it does
mm,
take energy, but I love it. I have found so much strange and interesting and genreless music that I would never have found. And that experience of hearing a song and thinking, is this brand new or 40 years old? I love
mm,
that feeling.
mm,
And I think to me, it's been a terrific good. And I think it's brought some revenue back to artists that they had lost early in the post CD era where there was Napster, so to speak, where the revenues were collapsing. I think it's pennies on the dollar. I understand that issue, but it's not nothing. And it supports their other acts, which could be a live act, could be merchandise, could be t-shirts, could be just the possibility of being acknowledged as an artist and connecting with other artists.
mm.
I think it's both and.
Yep. Back when we were kids, we'd go to a show, we'd go to a concert that was not expensive at all, but it was to promote the album. The sales were made with the album. Now it's completely reversed. The albums are
Yeah.
given away and all the money is made with the live performance. So it puts it back into the performer. The performer has to go out on the road now to actually, it's just a different model. If it's better or worse, it doesn't really matter. It's just a different model.
I think it also used to be, I remember with the White Stripes refusing to have their music placed in commercials. And now that's a
Mm.
huge, I believe it's still a huge source of revenue, not just commercials, but film and TV. I think when you talk about live music being remunerative, I think it's t-shirts and stickers. I
Mm.
don't know that it's and vinyl. I think that's where a lot of the revenue comes from now is licensing deals.
Hmm.
It's a struggle, and in that book, Derishowitz's book, it says, was it better during the Medici where you'd have a patron and you'd have to paint according to his whims? I don't know. There's never been an ideal scenario for artists. And ideally, there are therapeutic and philanthropic avenues to kind of balance the demands of technology and the market. But it's not easy. You're dealing with people who are born with an unusual sensitivity.
Hmm. How has Rush and The Who changed your life?
More Rush than The Who. The Who, I think, is awesome and fun, and I still love them. Rush probably kept me alive. I was
Hmm.
looking back, and I have a niece who's struggling socially, and I thought about the years from third grade to 10th grade where I really struggled socially. And that's when I really got into Rush, which was a band whose lyrics were about being an outcast in some case, but who more so, I think, in their vision of their music was to be as profoundly and proudly idiosyncratic as possible. And I think that gave us awkward kids a chance or a vision of I could do it my way and it might work. And this won't last forever. And it was also the bizarreness of Rush and Marvel Comics and Dungeons and Dragons becoming accepted. Whereas, as Stephen Colbert says, to play D&D, you needed three friends who could keep a secret. Now it's just all out there. I wish I had invested differently.
Hmm. Yeah, you have a great quote where you say, yeah, Dungeons& and Dragons is like, the dungeon master is like God.
Well, I would say God has traits that sounds very arrogant and dangerous.
It does,
I
yeah.
think I think
Misquoted.
I hope I'm saying that God has traits akin to a dungeon master in
Right.
designing a world and allowing players freedom to act within and have their actions have consequences. Although
So,
dungeon master, oh sorry,
could you please go?
No, a dungeon master has providence and can control little aspects of the experience. I don't think God behaves that way.
Mm, yes, yes. Were you a dungeon master as well?
I am a dungeon master tonight. I
Ah,
am, but I'm supposed to be playing a game tonight. I think it's going to get canceled because I had found another commitment on my calendar. But yeah, I play every Thursday. I'm free. Yeah, not
that's
just Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I like a lot of science fiction games, and we're in the middle of an urban fantasy game set in the southern tip of South America.
hmm.
So,
So there something happens with all this artistry, and I shouldn't say that, but certain things happen, and you make a major shift in your life alone to divinity. Tell me about that.
I don't know. Uh, it's hard. It's hard to think about the things that have precipitated major change. I mean, the more recent one was leaving the pulpit about two
Hmm,
and a half years ago. And I loved being a pulpit rabbi for 12 years. Maybe 8 of those years were great.
hmm,
And it was great until it wasn't. And I think it's terrifying and very upsetting to leave certain lives behind. On the other hand, right now, I'm more spiritually satisfied and happy than I've been since I was a kid.
hmm,
I think the change you're talking about is when I went after college to first to the Peace Corps and then to Los Angeles to work in the music business. The highlight of which, of course, was meeting Britney Spears and getting invited to Rick Rubin's party,
hmm,
obviously. Um, but that kind of fell apart. You know, I was not psychologically equipped. I was too full of myself. I didn't have a backup plan in terms of money and earnings. And I went home and enlisted first in a master's program and then in seminary. And I think that is sort of a crashing of reality. It must happen to a lot of us. You know, I got fired from a job once and I hated it. I mean, it still stings to this day, 20 plus years ago later, but I think we should all get fired from a job at least once.
hmm.
Ideally, just once. To know, to get smacked in the face with reality kind of sucks. But what would you do without character building experiences?
Yeah, I heard you talk about that. You were 26 years old, and it was one of the worst days of your life when you got fired. Without that, would you become a rabbi?
I don't know.
Hmm,
I don't know. There was a day I once flirted with Britney Spears, and I told my kids, and they were like, good thing that didn't work out because we wouldn't be here. So
hmm,
it's very hard to imagine the counterfactual. I think since an age before I can remember, I knew I wanted to become a rabbi. How long would it have taken to get to that path? I can't say. It's a good question. I think it would have come up anyway. I don't
hmm,
know. What's interesting about this lifetime, those years in LA always seemed like a waste of time. And now that time spent in entertainment is coming back to help me work with artists. So
hmm.
maybe it's never lost. Yeah.
Alon, you say you, as a child, you had to pull to become a rabbi. Explain that to me.
Well, Christians are sort of blessed to have this concept of calling that Jews
Mm,
aren't very comfortable with, right? To just explain it away to say, I knew I wanted this. God
right.
was telling me this was part of me. But I don't have a better sense of why.
Mm,
I mean, it just felt like that is the direction my life will take. I looked at rabbis and wanted to be like them. Jewish professionals were protecting and supporting me during very challenging times in my life.
mm,
I had very positive experience of Jewish camps and youth groups and synagogues. All my dad's buddies were people he cycled with from our synagogue growing up.
hmm.
There was an inevitability to it, but I can't explain why logically. They just were spaces I felt really good about and wanted to give back to. But there's no, my son says that he wants to be a doctor because he can help people and it pays well. Right? There was
Mm.
no sort of logical statement of pros and cons.
Hmm.
It just felt right from a very young age.
And those times being a rabbi when you're helping people and you say that 8 out of the 12 years were great. I heard some great phrases from you that I want to get your feedback on. 3 of them specifically. Everything is going to be okay. God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, and everything happens for a reason. These are all wrong.
Yes. Are you saying that you think that or I think that?
No, I heard you say them, and you say
Yeah.
that they're not correct at
You
all.
should never say those things.
Right.
I hadn't heard this until recently, but apparently one of our professors used to call that theological malpractice.
Ah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think everything's going to be okay. I think there are many good things coming regardless to the bad or neutral things. I don't think everything happens for a reason, but I do think it's possible to learn from every experience, bad and good, and we should. Otherwise, our time is wasted. And God never gives us anything we can't handle. It's just bullshit
Right.
because suicide. Right? Suicide is clearly an example of someone having mental health issues that they cannot manage. No, I mean, there are versions of those ideas that I think are better spoken. And there are things that you're never supposed to say at a hospital bedside, even if you believe them.
Even if you believe them.
Well, to quote another professor, you don't do theology at bedside.
Hmm.
Right? It's useful, and I've said this to people whom I mentor or other colleagues. It's useful to have a theology you can carry with you to a painful, to a pediatric cancer ward. But there's no point in telling people that. That's not what they need at that moment, right? They need love and presence and support. Again, to go to the artist statement, right? I don't think it's important for an artist to put out their statement, but it's good for the artist to know for herself or
Hmm.
himself.
Another quote I heard you say is like, what was it? Everybody's life seems great outside of my office until they come in.
Yes, I still see that. Yeah. Everyone seems so self-assured when they're out in public, and everyone's putting on a brave face. And then I think Plato, or it's not clear Philo or Plato or where this comes from, that everyone is fighting a battle and you should just give them some grace. Everyone is fighting a difficult battle. And then Proverbs says that only the heart knows its own bitterness.
Hmm.
They're always in a struggle. You should just be sympathetic that I don't know the totality of who you are and what you're dealing with. Even my wife, just
Hmm.
been hard to kind of understand that even in the most intimate relationship in my life, I still don't really know another person. We
Hmm.
always go to bed in our own head, right? Like I might say goodnight to her, but the last few moments of every day are just inside my head,
Hmm.
alone.
You also told a great story, and ever since I heard you say it, it's made me think about the boy who was late for dinner. Do you know the story? The boy's late for dinner, and the parents are upset, and the bicycle.
Yeah. Okay. You have done your research. I'm almost embarrassed to be so well seen. I always say, we our greatest desire and greatest fear is to be seen.
Hmm.
This I learned as a kid from my rabbi. There's some story. Let's see if I can recreate it. Kid's late for dinner. Parents are angry, and it's, what are you late for? I said, well, I was walking home from the park and I saw a kid whose bicycle was broken. And he was sitting on the stoop crying over his broken bicycle. So I said, well, why were you late? You can't fix a bicycle. I said, yeah, of course I can't fix a bicycle. I just sat with him and cried too. I think that goes to the man idea of like, I'm going to fix
Hmm.
instead of be with. Sometimes it's nice to have things fixed,
Yeah.
but sometimes you can't.
But empathy.
Is hard.
It's hard, and it's lacking sometimes in our society, and,
Many times.
yeah. Yeah.
Perspective taking is lacking too, right? You should be able to understand in most political arguments why someone would take the side they're taking,
Mm.
or at least ask them about it. Why someone would be pro-choice or pro-life. Both those sides seem comprehensible if you talk to someone, instead of just assuming the worst about your opponent in a debate.
Good people can disagree.
Yes, that was our
Well,
mayor. Our mayor used to say that a lot. Mayor Madeline Rajero, wonderful person, used to say that. Good people can disagree.
you also said that going back to you had a calling to become a rabbi, and you liken it to Jonah.
Well, Jonah might be, I don't know if I think about Jonah the most of all the parts of the Bible, or I just like it, or I think it's funny. I mean, the idea of a guy who God calls to be a prophet, and he's like, I'd rather be a sailor,
Hmm.
you know? And then the point is, Jonah, you're a terrible sailor. Do what you're supposed to do. I think a lot of rabbis go through that, where they avoid the
Interesting.
calling as long as possible. I know one of my mentors would describe that. It was easier. Becoming a rabbi was easier than avoiding it.
Hmm.
And I think that's what happened in LA. Becoming a rabbi became easier than running away from it. I was a pretty bad sailor. In my case, music, business, peon was the version of me being a sailor.
Hmm.
Someone had to throw me out of the ship.
Avoiding it was more difficult than becoming it.
Yeah.
I'm going to dive into that a little bit. So it was because it was, I'm going to use the term nagging because it was pressing.
Yeah.
That's why.
Because I sucked at other things also.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd love to be an actor. I'd love to be the lead singer and guitarist for a rock and roll band, but I'm actually pretty bad at the F chord. I could memorize lines, so I guess I could have been an actor, but yeah, I think eventually you kind of bump into the realities of this combination of events and skills and actions is what pleases my soul and what I'm good at and what I can commit to getting better at. Running a podcast, being a doctor, you have to find the thing that's right for you.
Mm.
And then with artists, my work is finding the art that's right for them with them. It's hard. I think you could bang your head against the wrong life for a long time. Maybe your whole life you could bang your head against the wrong ideas, but if you can attune to what is really calling you and what you are made of and made for, I've never been as happy professionally as I am right now. I mean, there are health issues in my extended family. There are political issues in the world at large. There are my immediate family. We fight and disagree, but spiritually and professionally, I'm on the right track. It is using the most of myself and the greatest parts of me. But I am almost 50, so it didn't happen until recently. And maybe in 5 years, this won't be what I'm supposed to be doing. Today, I'm in the right place. And the questions you're asking, as challenging as they are and as clever and insightful as they are, my ability to answer them comes from a sense of this is who I am. And the imposter syndrome bothers me less and less. To go back to the image of people outside my door, I think we all feel like imposters, and we all should a little bit, but less and less.
Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access, receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today. I don't like the F chord either alone, by the way.
It's very hard.
It is.
It hurts my wrist.
Yeah, it's tough. So what is Dungeons and Dragons taught you? Playing as a kid, you're still doing it now. I thought I heard you say you like to gravitate to the kind of evil bad characters only because it's opposite of you.
I think a lot of people use tabletop roleplay to experiment with sides of themselves. I have a friend who always plays a character who's very destructive because I think he's a leader and a manager in his work. And I think he'd like to tell people to F off. So he does that in the game. I always had to be the nicest person in the room, the most mature person in the room as a rabbi at board meetings and so forth. So in the game, I wanted to be the devil. I think more so as a dungeon master, what I've learned is the ability to give other people space. And it's great training. Teaching is great training to be a dungeon master, and being a dungeon master is a great training to be a teacher.
Hmm.
Right? To let your students shine, to give them the information they need, but not so much that it stifles their creativity. To have a sense of humor, to have a sense of vulnerability. I'm thinking about the things that I learned from D&D that made me a good teacher, those same skills.
Imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And moral imagination. How
Hmm.
would a person act in this situation? How would a person different than me, who is a Goliath barbarian, act when confronted with a blue dragon, right? I think it's important. I think there is so much of value in tabletop role play, both as a cornerstone to teaching artists about the power of narrative, but also the capacity for moral imagination, the capacity for playfulness, that we need to reconnect with our younger selves that were playful and had what the Buddhists call beginner mind.
Hmm.
But also it uses so many different kinds of intelligences, whether it's math or artistic or interpersonal. It's a great pedagogic tool that I have used also.
Yeah, we played, like I mentioned, Dungeons and Dragons. Great times, and no technology involved when we played. It was all dice and paper, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it is great fun, and I look favorably upon those days. So right
Do you
now, though,
remember your favorite character? Do you remember any characters you played? People tend
yeah,
to have fond memories of like an elf from their past.
I had a half elf fighter Beaumont, I believe. How about you?
Beaumont was the name.
Yeah.
That's a good name. That's a good name. My favorite character that I played was the evil one. It was in a game called Shadowrun, which is like science fantasy, futuristic cyberpunk, and he was the devil. At
Huh.
first, I thought he was a ghost. He was kind of an assassin, um, and he was he. It wasn't a he. It wasn't clear what gender Jackal was. A dwarf, and would just disappear into the crowd, and then had a sniper rifle. So, and buy people's souls by not killing them. I mean,
Wow.
it was a terrible,
Wow.
but it was kind of fun to play into that. Like, what motivates a person to be a sociopath? He was, I think, fairly some sort of sociopath. If we had continued the game, I would have seen that more clearly. Someone so different to me. But I think we all contain these multitudes, right? Like, I think there must be a part of me that is evil. I know, because I know that's what Judaism would say also, that there is a part of us that is evil and we need to manage it.
So right now, you're almost 50 years old, Alone. What role does spirituality play in your life?
All of it.
100% of your life is spiritual.
Not at every moment. That's sort of I was being flippant.
Sure.
But I feel deeply connected and attuned to something that is beyond us and within us. Mystery, joy, gratitude, grace, the flow, the muse. Not at every moment, and I'm still a person of great fears, and I still burp, and I'm still like, I've cut the image a certain way because all of my shirts have food stains on them. Like, I'm kind of a messy eater. I'm struggling with my weight. I do wear an imposter syndrome sometimes. So I'm not perfect, but I do feel that call that Jonah had, or that the theologian Howard Thurman had, to speak things of value, to help people find meaning, to help make the world better, in small ways, and perhaps one day large ways, but for now in just small circles. And then, honestly, some days I'm just a shitty father and a disgruntled husband. And there's a piece of me that can see that some days I'm a real piece of shit. Not too often. Not too often. But I'm not all the way there, and life is too short to get all the way there. But I'm moving in the right direction. And I'm happy. I feel like, with all the strife in the world or in my internal systems, local systems, there's a part of me that is unstained and is unrelated to external experience and is just content within.
Hmm.
And that's, to me, that's spirituality. That's the soul. That's the flow. Whatever words we have used for it, it all comes down to just that 3-letter word of God that I say to people is just an easy to pronounce word for all the things we can't explain.
Mm.
It's just a shorthand. God is just a shorthand for something more awesome.
I too, alone, am deeply flawed, and I'm not my best self all the time. I know. I heard you talk about depression, and we have an artist in common that we both like, Gary Goldman, and he talks greatly about
Oh yeah, I
depression.
forgot we both. Oh God,
Yeah,
yeah. Wow. Do you have his phone number?
I don't.
You should do an episode with him.
I
He's
would love to.
bananas.
I would love to.
Oh God, Gary Gulm. I think he's a prophet. I think the
Really?
greatest stand-ups are prophets. I think his special, The Great Depression, I have shared it more times than I can count because he takes these experiences of mental health crises up to and including needing electroconvulsive therapy and makes them incredibly funny and enlightening and deep. And he's a wordsmith and he's bright and compassionate. I'd love to help him learn more about his Jewish origins because I think he disdains that in some of his bits, but
He does.
which I do too. There are times. Yeah, I mean, I think what a point he makes that I learned in officiating the funeral of a suicide of a 19-year-old is that mental health and depression are fatal illnesses if not treated. We'll make, as he says, we may call it suicide, but it is death by depression or bipolarity.
Lord, has there been anything in the last month or so that you changed your mind on?
Last month or so. I started watching YouTube clips of a political bent different to my own. Without giving away which side of debates I'm on, I started trying to understand the other side. I haven't changed my mind on that one. What is a thing? I feel like there is, but I'm struggling to name it. Maybe not in the past month.
I'll just say while you're thinking, the importance of creating these steel men instead of straw men, where we can actually, you mentioned before with abortion, and perhaps you're talking about now, instead of having the straw man that can just kind of be cut down and generalized, we make a steel man. Okay, I want to see what their side can say, even if it's different than mine. I mean, I think it's important exercise for all of us to go through.
I mean, I think it's extremely important to the Talmud and to the Jewish tradition that you don't minimize your opponent's thought process. Right? There is a phrase in the Gemara, which is a strand of the Talmud, a strand of Jewish thinking from 3rd, 4th, 5th century. What would the other side have said if you made this claim? What might your opponent say? I don't know how seriously they're playing that game, but it is important, to recognize that good people can disagree. I think evil is extremely rare, but it is real. But most people are pliable and capable of thinking and capable of debating, and more important than debate, just having a conversation where you come in with the idea, I might change my mind. I feel like the more likely thing that I've changed my mind is some sort of work of art where I came around to thinking this isn't bad or this is bad. But I can't think of what it is. I feel like there was a song and I was like, I actually hate that song, or vice versa. My sister said to me, we both have gotten into Chapel Roan in the past year. And she said, what's your favorite Chapel Roan song? And I said, Casual, I think. And she said, that's the right answer. You're like setting me up. What's your favorite song? I was like, Casual? Oh, yeah, that's the right answer.
You got an A that day from your sister. Yeah. I had the great fortune yesterday, Alona, speaking to somebody from Croatia, and she came over when she was 18, but she was just describing as a child how there were bombs going over her head. And how there just wasn't any food, and her mother, that was this great engineer, had to work in a hotel or something. And when they came to this, my point of all that is that perspective I could never understand. And so if I'm having a discussion, they have a particular opinion, how can I possibly understand that with just such a different background? It's such a different upbringing. I think it's important. I like to think that I can change my mind on any subject given new evidence.
Well, to circle back, I don't think I will come around to thinking that the Who is I do think the Who is better than the Rolling
I
Stones.
know I've heard you say this. You don't like the three
But
songs.
I try not to be as dogmatic about most other things.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think a thing that might have changed in the past month is my relationship to Passover, since it
Mm, yeah,
just occurred.
yeah.
But I can't name exactly what might have shifted. I was up in Boston as my mother was recovering from a procedure, and just being with her became much more important than observing the Seder, which I both regret and understand.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that I am changing my mind on my religious practice, but it is shifting in ways that are often uncomfortable.
Hmm.
I had sort of reliable Jewish practices, and now they don't serve me in the same way.
Hmm.
It's scary. I don't know if it's a change in mind or a change in environment that describes.
Perhaps both.
Yeah.
So I started my business in the 90s. So I'm from New Haven, which is just south of Boston and of course east of Rochester. And I was working way too hard and, working 14, 16-hour days. You're no stranger to this, I'm sure, and putting my health in the back seat. And then so I'm at the doctor and she tells me that I'm at 340 pounds. And she says, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. My daughter was just born. I know you have 4 boys, I believe, but
Yeah.
my oldest was just born. And so this scared the life out of me. So I'm driving home, punching the steering wheel. What have I done to myself? This is my pie hole. I've done it. Spent the next 6, 7 months, changed, all my dietary nutritional habits. And I lost about 130 pounds and kept it off. So, you can't look at it as a finishing line. These are lifelong changes you need to make. It's not just me. I can do whatever I want to myself, but I've got this family now and I have to be around. I need to be around. So when I tell people the story, I always get, what's your secret? Tell me your secret. And there's no secret. Discipline. That's how I did it. Willpower, focus. How does discipline play a role in your life?
Well, quick follow up. Did you have people supporting you in that?
No,
Really?
I didn't tell anybody.
Oh my God. That's much. I don't know if I'd recommend that course, but
I wouldn't either.
that's much harder.
I didn't tell anyone. Of course, people at the gym knew because I was there
Sure.
every day, but
Yeah.
no, I didn't tell
Yeah.
anybody. That was my way. That was my way. Yeah.
My current discipline is I try to walk 30 miles a week. I become over the past couple of years very apt or able at meditating.
Mm.
I'm trying to change the way I eat. Not 130 pounds, but maybe 30 I'd like to lose. I don't want it to affect my long-term capacity to do the work I care about and to be there with my children and wife and community. I've always been a bit of a monk. I like quitting things, but it's not always easy. I was just in Massachusetts where cannabis is legal, and I need to be very careful around that product. Discipline. I mean, I get up early, not too early. I mean, I would say it's sweet that you think I have worked 12 and 14-hour days in my life, but I've never done that.
Really?
Oh, I'm a daydreamer. I do not work long hours. I think about work in my off time, and I daydream how to create new programs or ideas or research. But if you were to count the actual hours in the office, no, I've never been much more than a 40-hour week person, unless it was a particular event coming up at work. I've always been, I mean, in fact, I think that's a kind of discipline that I have, is to know when to go home at the end of the day and to know that the work will always be there waiting for you. It will never be done. So you might as well just put it on hold for a few hours and go home and have dinner.
Submit.
Submit, tap out and come back. Yeah. You got to tap out sometimes.
Being a rabbi in the Torah, how is discipline viewed there?
Well, so that is the hard part. My relationship to the historic rabbis, I feel very awkward. They used to work 20-hour days.
Mm,
I mean, I think Judaism is one of its wisdoms is that it is very enjoyable to quit things or to say no to things.
mm. Important.
The number of no's are large in Judaism, and I think they are a relief from other pressures. So if you can't use your phone or a television on the Sabbath,
Mm,
you'd wind up engaging in other things: conversation, board games, sleep, making love with a spouse. You do need to be able to say no, and
mm,
that is a muscle that Judaism helps you engage.
hmm.
And traditional Jews have regular practices of prayer 3 times a day, and fast days, and religious holidays that create other rhythms. All of those are disciplines, some of which I engaged in, fewer of which I engaged in now. And there are other disciplines. I will try to spend as much of my day as possible without screens.
Hmm.
I would love to have a flip phone, although I think we're past the age where it's even possible because
Yeah.
you can't buy parking
Yeah.
without a
You
smartphone.
can't check into a hotel. Yeah. It's
Right.
just, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I flew Allegiant and they will charge you extra for a physical boarding pass.
Yes. Ridiculous. Yeah. So you think as a child with this calling you had and, you know, your times you spent, in Africa and going to Los Angeles and coming back and becoming a rabbi, was discipline instilled as a child? Was it just assumed? How is it manifested in your life?
I think that's really hard for me to see because my eldest is a fantastic student and getting really good at cello and pretty good at piano and
Wow.
starting to explore soccer. Although I don't know how serious he is about soccer. And it reminds me of my sister and to an extent me, because I don't feel like we put pressure on him to succeed in these ways, but he figured it out and he's devoted to them.
Mm.
And I was academically very successful, as was my sister. And I had, I did plays and I was on the wrestling team. I was terrible in sports. And it was sort of more assumed than nagged at. So I think at some level there was an internal motivation. And then there's psychological. You want to please your parents. You want to
Mm.
please your teachers. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's a character trait or endowed or imbued, nature, nurture. I'm not sure. And again, it's something you work at, but then there are weaknesses. I definitely scroll Instagram much more than I wish I would,
Mm.
which I wish I would look at Instagram
Mm.
0.0.
Mm.
Yeah.
What motivates you, Alone?
Curiosity.
Hmm.
One of my good friends in college, and I really struggled because everyone was so goal oriented. He says, we're all so goal oriented, but you're very curiosity oriented. And I think he nailed it. I love trying new foods. I love strong flavors. I love, I'm not one to go back to the same restaurant again and again. I'm always excited to explore new music, new art, new food, to travel. I don't travel much anymore with kids. I used to. It's curiosity, I think, is my number one motivation. And then I think in pair with that, I think to do that and to be the best possible self, I think that is also a motivation to learn more about myself and the world, to be my best possible self, which requires, I think, courage. And if I ever write or speak on this, I always think that courage is the most important value a human can have. Because you really don't do anything else without courage,
Hmm.
whether it's discipline or drive. You need courage to have those things. Yeah, I'm driven by curiosity and a little bit of playfulness and a sense of the absurdity of life and probably by a sense of the sanctity of life, that life is short and very sacred
Hmm.
and we ought to use our time wisely and well.
Hmm. Is curiosity fueled by constant learning, or maybe that's the other way around? Is constant learning fueled by curiosity?
Both.
Hmm.
I think it goes both ways. I think you're right. I think, you learn and that makes you want to explore further, and then you are curious, so you explore further. It's learning and curiosity have got to be deeply connected because I read the news magazine, The Economist, and one of their critiques of certain politicians is that so and so is not curious,
Hmm.
right? Like they're not even interested in history of the Soviet Union. That they're not interested in this other people that they are confronting politically. Yeah, I think curiosity, and it was, I think curiosity was very difficult to my parents because, and as a parent, I understand, enough questions. Like, it's too many questions, sweetie. I
Mm.
need a break from your questions.
Mm.
And it wasn't until graduate school that a professor of mine said that he loved my curiosity, that was what was making me a great student. Yeah, I recommend curiosity. And I think as we explore creativity, we kind of light up that young part of us that is very curious and playful and open.
Mm. I find that as I get older, I have more questions than I have answers. The
Amen.
Yeah, thus the impetus, the start of even this podcast. I mean, I can't find a better way than to be able to talk to intelligent, smart people like yourself, where it would be very difficult for us to bump into each other and have a great conversation other than on this platform. So, given the curiosity and the learning as a constant goal in your life, as your full motivation, how do you measure success?
I don't know. I mean, if my goal is to be, to use sort of a jargony word, the most self-actualized person I can be by the end of my life, to me, the most self-aware and contributing member, I don't know that there is a way to measure.
Hmm.
That's not a certain kind of idolatry. I mean, I'd love to be wealthy. I don't see that in my future, but it's certainly not a good yardstick. I think you're measured by your eulogy, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I've done enough eulogies to have a sense of what matters when the kids talk about their father. Um, I'd love it if my kids don't stop talking to me and they always talk to each other. That would be a pretty
Mm.
high. I've seen enough families where that isn't true. I don't know. In general, I am proud of myself. In general, I feel like I am living a life well lived. As I said earlier, I can be a piece of shit by turns, but in general, I think I make good choices and am honoring the gift of getting to exist. I think Jeff Tweedy, the singer of Wilco, wrote a book on writing music. And I didn't love the book, but a quote in the book that I keep coming back to is, you can't make a good choice unless you know you're making a choice.
Mm.
And one of my favorite comedies of all time is What We Do in the Shadows, about vampires in Staten Island. And at repeated points in the show, you realize that time has no meaning if you're immortal.
Hmm.
They spend 15, they talk about spending 15 years reading, or 3 weeks deciding whether to organize the shelves by title or by author. And I think time matters, and you can't waste time, but you can use it. And the way you use it is by making it intentional, by choosing what you're going to do at every moment you can.
Hmm.
And I feel like I generally do that. I don't just get lost in Facebook um, or fruitless pursuits, addictions, but I have, and I do. Um, and I could get better. But I am generally proud of the way I live my life, and often feel that if I were to have to die tomorrow, I would be okay with that.
Hmm.
But you never know what legacy you have. There's no way to measure it until you're gone.
We get to exist.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's an amazing gift. I mean, I think with all the stuff, I was thinking this past week that suffering is not optional,
Hmm.
but joy can be optional.
Hmm.
And if you can't be grateful just for the fact of being here, and acknowledge that with the gift of existence comes hips that age and wrinkles and sorrow, that those are natural outcomes of just being, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. Yeah, I like being here.
Hmm.
Most days. Most days I like being here.
Well, I like talking to you today, and thank you for this great gift of your time alone. But
Thank you for all your great thoughts and questions also.
I love the light that you shed. I love your spirit. I love your energy. Please keep it up. Anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you? Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it.
So my website is eclecticcleric.com. I'm on most social media at eclecticcleric, although I don't check that often. You can email me, rabbi@eclecticcleric. So if you just remember the words eclectic and cleric, which is harder to spell than you might think, but you can find me. And you could probably certainly Google me if you have trouble with those. But I'm pretty easy to find.
Eclectic, ECLECTIC. Eclecticcleric.com. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Like you said, you're on
Thank you.
LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. I thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in the general Knoxville area, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
I would love it. I would love it. I also make excellent coffee.
Fantastic. You be well.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.